Look at all these different types of line. Dude, there are a ton of different types of line out there to use. There's monofilament, there's fluorocarbon, and there's braid. So I'm gonna set the record straight. This might take a few minutes, so just bear with me. I'm gonna set the record straight on what each line, what their characteristics are, kind of what they are good for, and then really kind of where to start when you're talking about monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braided line. So let's start with probably the oldest. We're talking about monofilament line. This is a Sunline monofilament. It's called the Fire. It's more of a all-around monofilament. And so what makes it to be monofilament is made from one material, and it's usually it's a nylon-based line. They have copolymers, which is nylon and something else mixed in there to make the line. But this is the oldest line that's been around the longest, and so the technology is the oldest, if you will. And the best characteristics of monofilament is that it's more forgiving, it has more stretch, so that can be really good for beginners. It can be really good for people just learning how to fish. Some of the big drawbacks are that it absorbs water, so that monofilament line will absorb water, and then so when you stop fishing, it dries out. So that getting moist and drying out causes the line to get damaged. It causes it to crack. This line is subject to UV damage. So if you leave this rod with monofilament out in the sunlight, let's say for a week or two or longer, that sun is really going to damage this line right here. It does not reflect the UV light. It absorbs it. So it's a lot more subject to damage. It doesn't last near as long as the other lines as far as that goes. So it is cheap. Yes, it is very cheap. It's very quick to produce. I've been in the Berkeley factory and I've seen the different types of line be manufactured. And when monofilament is coming out of the machine, it is buzzing out of there. So the material is not near as expensive, and it's a lot faster to produce because they just melt all these little beads and then they extrude it at whatever size diameter to make the line. All monofilaments is made basically the same. But this is the monofilament that I would choose. I really like the Defier. There's other Sunlines. There's XT, there's XL. When you're talking about the different types of monofilaments, some are going to be a little more supple, and they're probably going to be a little more stretchy, and then some of them are going to be a little bit stiffer, but they're going to be a little more abrasion resistant. So if you're an old school angler, we're talking about Trilene XL, very supple, very stretchy, versus Trilene XT, which is a lot tougher, holds up better to flipping and pitching and abrasions, but it still doesn't get anywhere near the abrasion resistance of fluorocarbon. So we'll get to that next, but that's the little brief history and so forth on monofilament line. And remember, it does get wet, so if you want to help it, this is a pros tip for any of the lines. Throw some of this old KVD line conditioner on there, put it on. Pro tip, put it on there before you go out on the water. Spray it on your line, get it good and soaked with the line conditioner, let it dry before you go out there. It's almost like a wax for your car to an extent. So you put it on your line, let it dry, and then that helps. It doesn't make it sticky, it doesn't make it slippery. It's not a silicone based spray. I'm not a huge fan of those because I think after about 6 casts that stuff comes off. The KVD line conditioner will last you a couple hours on the water, in my opinion, before it eventually wears off basically, and then you have to let the line dry again and then reapply. If you apply it while the line's wet or apply it and then make a cast, it's really not going to do much good. So there's your monofilament and your pro tip on monofilament and fluorocarbon. But then we get into fluorocarbon. So this is Sunline FC Sniper is their #1 selling fluorocarbon. Then there's the Shooter. I get a lot of people asking the difference. We'll get to that here in a second. The biggest difference between fluorocarbon and monofilament is that fluorocarbon is denser. It's a lot denser material. So being that it's denser, It's going to have better sensitivity, quite a bit better sensitivity. It's got a little less stretch, not quite the same amount of stretch that a monofilament is going to have, but it does not absorb water and it reflects UV light. So UV light does not damage it, and the water, you know, when you get fluorocarbon quote unquote wet, you're really just getting the outside of the line wet. It's the water is not penetrating inside of the actual line like it does with the monofilament. So fluorocarbon, even though it is more expensive, the material itself is more expensive than whatever your monofilament's being made of. It is going to last a lot longer. There are things that you can do to make this line last even longer. Number one, second pro tip, keep your guides clean on the rod. I've done videos on this, a whole video on this, but if you just periodically clean the guides on your rod and clean the line guide on your reel, that is a big deal. If you have a spinning reel, make sure that the roller, the bail and the roller are clean. You'd be surprised how much dirt can accumulate right there. Any place that dirt can accumulate, whether it's any of the guides or that line deal, it could damage your line significantly, especially if you're fishing around salty type water, brackish water, or you're fishing around areas where there's a lot of debris in the water, real dirty water. That sand and that little silt in there can really damage your line. Keep that stuff clean. Your fluorocarbon or your monofilament, whatever, is going to last a lot longer. But the fluorocarbon, the differences between different fluorocarbons, there's a bunch of different ones out there on the market. Sniper is one of the more popular ones, regardless of brand. But this one is a little more supple. It's a little more supple. Diameter's a little bit smaller, so it casts very well. I'm using the FC Sniper anytime that I'm going to be fishing a crankbait, chatterbait, spinnerbait, anything where I'm casting and retrieving. That's what I want the FC Sniper for. A little less stretch than say other lines out there. Again, that's the fluorocarbon. I really like this for my spinning reels as well. I'll use this on my leaders. We'll get to leaders in a minute, but I'll use this on my leaders, and it's money. It's money for me. But if I'm flipping and pitching, if I'm going to be, creating a big shock to the line, whether, flipping, pitching, you putting the wood to them, that's when I'm going to go with the shooter. It's almost twice as expensive as a sniper, but you were talking bigger diameters. You're not going to be using near as much. And on my flipping and pitching reels, I feel like that line lasts a lot longer because you don't have that constant tension and cast. You don't cast near as much as you do with, say, a crankbait, chatterbait, spinnerbait, something like that. You don't have near as much, as many casts per hour of fishing. So the line lasts a lot longer. I can get, use whatever line I want. And I've had reels with shooter on it that have lasted through like 4 or 5 tournaments, like Bassmaster tournaments. So I'm talking practice and the tournaments, because they didn't need to be replaced. I made sure my guides were clean, and I pull off a little bit and retie if I get hung up or catch a couple fish. But so that's why the shooter is a little more expensive. But if I'm flipping, pitching, Carolina rigging, Texas rigging, anything like that, any kind of worming, that's what I'm going to go to. So that's the fluorocarbon, and those are the characteristics of fluorocarbon versus monofilament. So what's the other one? The other one is braided line. So there's a couple different types of braided line, not just within Sunline. Braided line's been around since the early 90s is when I remember it. But I think it was late 80s when it kind of came on. First one was a Berkeley Gorilla braid. This first one I ever saw. It's pretty cool. Power Pro has been around for a long, long time. And a lot of people love Power Pro, but for me, Power Pro is very rough. I mean, when you pull it through your guides, it sounds like you have a tow rope in there. I'm not a big, there's so much more better technology, because Power Pro is one of the early ones, man. And you can't tell me in the last 20 years there's not been better technology to make a braided line. Of course there is. So I've updated mine, and the X Plasmas came out just a couple years ago, I think 2 years ago. It is hands down the best all-around braid I've ever used. Period. You need to understand kind of what different braids are there. So this to kind of show that this is a Sunline Siglon. This is a lower priced braid, but a very good braid, and it's called PE8. And what the 8 stands for is the numbers of strands that are braided to make the line. So most braids are either 4 carrier or 8 carrier. Most of them are. And that is the biggest difference in braided line, 4 or 8 carrier. The 8 carriers are a lot more supple. You know, you think about it, it's all the little strands are a lot finer, and the line is a lot more supple. The line can cast better, but big but, the big drawback is that it's a little more brittle. So 12 pound versus 12 pound, if you're doing something where you're setting the hook real hard, the 8 carrier braids will fail. Your Power Pro, one of the reasons it was rough, and a lot of people like it, is because you can't hardly break it, but it's a 4 carrier braid, and it's not a very smoothly made 4 carrier braid, to where something like the X Plasma, much smoother. You know, the way that they make it is much smoother. That's why I love it as an all-around line. I mean, it is, 50 pound with a frog, I can jack them. I'm talking like 8 pounders. I can whack them as hard as I can hit them, and I will not break this. This is just very strong, stout line. And the X Plasma part puts it on another level. The X Plasma, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. When this plasma coating that Sunline has, they have it on some of their fluorocarbons and some of their braids. The plasma coating, actually, it's a treatment done to the outside of the line that helps repel water. So this braid right here does not absorb water. It only absorbs a very small percentage of water into the braid. Most every other braid, unless it's got some like super thick coating on it, some of them do, and I really don't like those because they're kind of stiff. This one does not have any coating on it, 8 carrier, but it does absorb water. So if you're talking about certain techniques, you don't want that line to absorb water. If you're talking about fishing topwater, like, spooks and whopper ploppers and things like that, I don't want that line to absorb water. That's why I'm going to X Plasma every time. But if I want something like a finesse technique, like we're talking about hair jigs and spy baits and things like that, and that's when I might pick up the PE8 Siglon, or another 8 carrier braid. Daiwa has that Samurai. It's very popular, but it's very brittle. And I don't care how, you can go all the way. I was like, okay, I'll just keep going up to 80 pound. Even the 80 pound will break. If you hit one hard on a flipping hook set, and that thing, it very well could pop. I know a number of people that had that problem. But if you ease back into them, you probably won't have any issues. But to me, that's too much risk to take when I can just put on the X Plasma, and then I can horse them out of there if I want to. Is that stuff, you could pull a dump truck with that, I'm telling you. And 50 pound braid, it to me is all you need. They have 60. If I'm fishing really heavy cover, I might go to 60. Or if I'm fishing a big whopper plopper, I might go up to 60 to help keep that line and help keep that bait up above the water surface. I might go to 60, but for everything else, 50 or 30 is pretty much all you need for a bait caster. I'm fishing 10 and 12 probably most of the time on a spinning reel. And then we're getting to spinning reels. A lot of people don't know where to go. Do I do braid? Do I do mono? Do I do fluoro? It kind of depends on your skill level and how serious you are about what you're doing. Beginners, start with mono. And the worst thing you can do is put too big of a line on your reel. That is a major problem. I've seen people with 2,500 or 3,000 sized reels trying to put 10 and 12 pound test on there. Dude, you're asking for problems. That's not going to work. Not going to work. 8 pound on a normal size spinning reel is as big as you want to put for any straight line, whether it's fluoro or monofilament. 8 pound is the biggest you want to put on there, or you're going to have all kind of issues. The next phase is to go to fluorocarbon. You definitely don't want to go more than 8. If you're drop shotting or doing some real light stuff, you can fish 6 or 7, no problem. But if you want to get even more serious about it, you can do the braid to leader. I've done a video on the FG knot. That thing is a mother to tie. Very tough to tie, be honest with you, but it's 100% worth learning. 100% worth learning. Once you get it, you'll get it. I've done some videos that show you the keys to that. But you're gonna, on those spinning reels, if you do a braided line, either type of braid, to a fluorocarbon leader, and again, I put the Sniper as my leader. I've done it for years, tried and true, does great. About a 20-foot leader with that FG knot, that is kind of the next level. That's what most all of the pros do. They do that braid to a fluorocarbon leader, and you want to have a little bit of length in there so it gives yourself a little bit of stretch. Remember, the braid has no stretch. If I don't know if I may have failed to mention that, but braided line has 0 stretch, and that's one of the big advantages of it. Plus, the braid lasts longer than any other line, so that's really the key. And there are some techniques, even for spinning reels, that I'll just go straight braid. I'll just do completely straight braid on spinning reels. If I'm fishing a wacky worm, if I'm fishing certain things where I want that bait to stay up in the water column a little more, yeah, straight braid does fine. I caught an 11.2 largemouth in Florida on straight 12-pound X plasma, so it definitely works, and it definitely will hold up for big fish, as long as you're not around too heavy a cover. I mean, I had to pull that fish out of some trees. It was really wild experience, but it does hold up to big fish on that straight braid. If you've got that fluorocarbon leader, you're only going up to as strong as that leader is. If you're saltwater fishing, a little bit different situation, because you're going to be using that leader for abrasion resistance, not as much for the stretch and all of that. So if that's your situation, you may not want to have a 20-foot leader. You may want to have like a 5 or 6 foot leader, not too long of a leader, but that's just a little bit different. I'm a bass fisherman, I'm not a saltwater fisherman, but I've done a little bit of that. So that tells you the difference between monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braided lines. All of them are good and can be utilized by all anglers. So the better you understand how to use each one of them, the better you can understand which one that you want to call for and which one you want to look for when you're out there on the water. So if you have any questions, drop them down there in the comments. I'll try to do my best to watch for the comments and the questions, and we can all learn together. If anybody has any tips they want to add on to this, please drop those down there as well. And if you're not already following or subscribed, please do that as well. And I appreciate you watching.